Today, we are going to talk about how to leverage your neurodiversity for career success. I cannot wait to talk about this topic. And in order for us to have a robust discussion about this, of course, I have a guest with me today. Lindsay, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Sue. My name is Lindsay Bennett. I am an ADHD coach and neurodiversity consultant. So I work with individuals to support them wherever they are on their ADHD or really neurodiversity or neurodivergent journey, as well as work with companies of all sizes to work with them to weave neuro inclusion and neurodiversity into their core company values.
Mm,
Prior to this, I spent about 20 years in the world of corporate brand management. And that has really shaped my approach as a coach, but also my consulting approach as well. I find a lot of joy to help companies, get the best out of their people, which is, their best resource. So
wonderful. So you are exactly the person we want to talk to today about this topic. So of course, I have some questions written down and I want to make sure we get to all of them. And the first question I have for you is, I hear the word neurodiversity, neurodivergent quite a bit nowadays. Tell me, what exactly does it mean to be neurodivergent?
yeah, there's a lot of terminology out there that can make the topic seem, scarier or more intense than it actually is. But
Yeah.
being neurodivergent, like I am, I've been diagnosed with ADHD. So it simply just means your brain processes, senses, learns, and experiences the world in reliably different ways than the dominant norm. So it's important to call out that it's not a medical label. So it's not
Mm,
a medical term. It's more like a social identity term or description that people use. And sometimes that's alongside diagnoses like ADHD or autism or dyslexia or OCD,
mm,
and sometimes without, right?
mm,
So, um, you might have also heard of the term neurotypical.
mm,
So that really just means not neurodivergent. It
mhm,
just is like shorthand for
mhm,
not being neurodivergent.
mhm,
But really, if you strip back all of those like fancy terms, everybody's brains are unique, right? All of our brains are different. But some of ours, like mine, diverge enough that, we need a little bit more intentional design
mhm,
in our workflow, our life, our intention overall, and support, than I guess like typical person.
mm.
But really, and I'm making these sort of like funny faces when I'm
Understood. I understand
yeah,
why you do. Yes, go on, keep going.
because, my thought is if everybody's brains are unique, then what is normal anyway, right?
Mm,
So I like to really try to use the term non neurodivergent instead of
mhm,
neurotypical,
mhm,
because you're not offending anyone if you say the term neurotypical, right? It
mhm,
just feels like we haven't quite got there yet as a society and a culture and in cultural conversations to realize that all of our brains are different and we should use more language that like destigmatizes and stops like othering people, right? So,
mhm.
I try to do my best to use the term non-neurodivergent instead of neurotypical, but again, you're not offending anyone if you say the term neurotypical.
Understood, understood. And so, being neurodivergent, you may process information differently, learn differently, see things differently, etc. And because of that, it may also cause a person to sort of react a little differently than what one may expect, right? Um, and the reason why being neurodivergent may require some additional ways of things being done at the workplace is because the workplace, like school systems, are designed for sort of a typical quote
Yeah.
unquote person.
Efficiency. They're
Correct.
designed for efficiency, right?
Correct. So it may not work for everyone.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Um, so tell me, if you meet one neurodivergent, do you meet all neurodivergents? Are they all monolithic?
No, never,
Tell
never.
me more. Tell me
Yeah,
more.
yeah. In fact, like, I'll get into why in a second, but just I'll start with, like, a really sort of funny personal story. I have been diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed later in life at 29, but then didn't really realize that I needed to lean into my neurodivergence, much later in life. But it's funny, I have both. You might have heard the term ADD or ADHD.
Mm,
ADD is, technically the um, uh, what's the oh my gosh, the pause for
time out.
oh my god, I totally just like what the okay, got it. Distractible type. And honestly, you can keep that in there if you want to.
All good, all good. Okay, so let's start with okay. So tell me, if you meet one neurodivergent person, have you met them all? Are neurodivergent folks monolithic?
Absolutely not.
Mm,
Everybody's different, especially those of us that are neurodivergent. I'll start with a funny personal story before I really get into, it, what that really means. But I was diagnosed with ADHD at 29, and I now have two kids.
mm,
My ADHD type is both inattentive
mm,
and hyperactive.
mm,
So the medical community is starting to just refer to it as one thing, so
mhm,
ADHD
mm,
instead of ADD or ADHD.
mm,
But that's beside the point. I bring that up to highlight your point about, it not being monolithic because I have both, and I swear my kids each got half of my brain. My son is totally inattentive. He's a
mhm,
sort of like absent-minded professor, is
mhm,
easily distractible, has so much creativity, feels so much deeply.
mm,
He feels very, very deeply. And then my daughter got the other side of my brain. She's super hyperactive, never stops moving, is always singing. She has a different sensory style than the three of us do. And so, I bring that up to share that everybody is very, very different. And our senses are different, our needs are different, and all of those things. The good news is we're starting to we, as in the big we, we're
mhm,
starting to understand a little bit more about what it means to be neurodivergent,
mhm.
and how there's like different factors that play a role, right? Like, and a big part of that is more research is being
Yeah,
done finally,
yeah.
right? So people of color, women of color, different
Mhm,
socioeconomic backgrounds,
mhm,
to help us like understand a little bit more.
mhm,
But the truth is that like all humans, because we're not one thing, in general, and whether it's a medical term or our different types or different parts of our identity, conditions like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD, they show up differently across people. And
mhm,
sometimes they show up together, right?
mhm, mm,
If you add gender, if you add culture, if you add environment, then you get a huge even more range of traits, different support needs, different strengths, different challenges. And that's
mm,
why, these like cut and paste, advice really backfires, right? When you're working to really understand your neurodiversity and how your brain works, you really have to be intentional about like designing your support, and it really has to be individualized.
mm,
um, yeah, I mean, and not to share more personal examples, but, you know, I mentioned that sometimes the different diagnoses may sort of overlap with each other. For example, I've only been diagnosed with ADHD, but I definitely have several traits of autism.
mhm,
I have a very specific sensory profile.
mhm,
I believe I have dyscalculia, which is a math learning disability. It explains a lot of things in my young childhood education. But I guess, to the reason I bring that up is one to show how all these traits may overlap, but why it's important to, when you are meeting, neurodivergent individuals, understand that everybody is really different. And just because you know one autistic individual, it's not the same as knowing a different autistic individual. That's why autism specifically, they talk about the spectrum, right? There's a
mhm,
wide spectrum of different types of traits and intensity around those traits.
mm. So, one of the reasons why, it's important to talk about this is I think there is a misconception by some who feel that this is within someone's control.
Mm, mhm.
In other words, we hear the famous, "Why can't you just pay more attention?"
Oh,
Why can't you just try harder?
that's a lot.
Right? Why can't you just read a little bit more carefully? Like we make these statements. It starts at schools, but then it
Yeah.
kind of, permeates into the workplace and into society. So this perception that neurodiversity is within one's control. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that? I mean, the whole point is it's not.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely is not. And, just note that I'm speaking more through the lens of ADHD because that is my
Sure.
specialty, that is
Of
my
course.
diagnosis. But yeah, you know, I don't fault people really
Mhm,
for saying that because ADHD especially is like really complex and confusing.
mm,
Like
mhm,
also really inconsistent.
mhm,
Well, sorry, I shouldn't say inconsistent. It appears to be inconsistent to the outside world
mhm,
that doesn't experience it. And
mm,
that is because ADHD is really situational, right?
mm,
So, like, for example, there might be one day that a playlist that I'm listening to is awesome. I put on my headphones, it keeps me on track, it keeps me aware of time, the beats sort of keep me moving. And then the next day, I will think, okay, I have to do work. What worked yesterday? Ooh, music worked yesterday. I'll put on my headphones, do the same thing. And then it's like, the record stops. And it's actually that music that I was listening to yesterday is super distracting
mhm,
or making me unfocused or whatever it might be. Now, I'm highly simplifying. There's a lot of factors that go into that, especially if you're a woman, hormones, all of those things. But um, just in general, you know, it's important to remember that, they can show up differently. These traits and these challenges can show up really differently. And it appears to be sort of inconsistent to the outside world. And so
mm,
which is as frustrating for people that don't have ADHD as it is for those of us that do, right? Like, trust me, we wish we could just do it or
mhm,
just pay attention or just, you know, uh, I wish I didn't have to play the mental gymnastics in my brain that I do every single day in order to just like get something very simple done. So when you say something or when, something like that is said, it sort of like invalidates that person's experience and makes them feel really self-conscious, makes them feel like, "Oh, well, wait, why can't I? Does that mean I'm a bad mom because I can't keep my kids on schedule? Does that mean I'm a, bad employee because I can't show up on time or I just can't pay attention in this meeting?" Right? So, you have to be careful of your language, so careful that you have to tiptoe, but just be aware that like we're struggling and trust me, we wish we could pay attention harder.
mhm,
And there's a lot more layers that I could get into with, each one of these things, but our brains are specifically wired for interest, not importance. So
mhm,
like when a teacher says to like a young kid, like my 8-year-old, for example, Ace, just pay attention harder. It's not that he doesn't want to pay attention. He might not be interested in that subject. And that's tough because obviously we need to go through life doing things that we might not be interested in. That's where coaching comes in and it's where you build strategies and tools to like work with your motivation, work with your interest and, come up with fun ways to gamify to get your brain going. But yeah, saying things like just pay attention or work harder or, over here, focus, focus. And trust me, as a neurodivergent mom, I find myself doing that to my kids. And
mhm,
honestly, like, I actually have chills right now because it, like, breaks my heart when I realize I did that.
mhm.
Sometimes it's so hard not to, right? Because you think, just pay attention." But, we're human, so, but that's really not the case. It's not what they're experiencing, right?
Absolutely, and absolutely, and the reason why I bring those things up is because I do think there is a misconception that it's sort of within your control. So
Yeah.
let's use your interest example.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say, "Well, if when I'm not interested, I don't want to pay attention to either." So how's that different than how I
Mm.
feel? And what I would say to that is, the amount your lack of motivation to pay attention to something because you're not interested, multiply that by 500 for someone
Yes.
who may be neurodivergent. So you may be able to relate to it, but you may not be able to relate to the degree that
Yes.
it is, in fact, a
Exactly.
barrier.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a perfect summary to
got it.
my rambling.
No, it's really just saying it in all different ways
Yeah.
to make sure that it clicks with people. So,
Absolutely.
um, all right. How do you ask for accommodations at work? So let's say
Yeah.
you are on the spectrum, or you have ADHD, or other form of neurodiversity, and you want to ask for accommodations. Maybe
Yeah.
you have sensory, like bright lights or noise or quiet or whatever. How do you ask for accommodations?
Yeah. This is such a topic that also has one of those, like, scary terms
Yeah,
associated to it, or, like, big terms, right? Like, the term accommodation is really just, if you think about it, accommodations are really just performance tools with different
right,
branding,
right.
right? So, if we strip away those tool or that term, and which, by the way, I get asked this all the time by my clients, like,
Yep.
"Hey, should I ask for accommodations? What does that mean?"
Yeah.
And there's, like, this immediate panic behind it,
Mhm,
like, "Oh
mhm.
gosh, do I have to do this?" Right? And, bottom line is asking for accommodations and choosing whether or not to disclose in that process, is always a personal decision. What I usually sort of like bring up with my clients and brainstorm with them on is, and I'm careful about my language there, because coaching is not about me telling them what to do. It's
Right.
us sort of talking through the different scenarios and the client coming up with what they decide they'd like to do on their own. Right. So I usually share, why don't we start informally, like in really plain language, to a boss, a mentor, a teammate, a peer, whatever it might be. Here's what helps me do my best work,
Mhm.
right? And, this is what I might need, right? And most colleagues and peers and teams will just go ahead and do that for you, right? Like, for example, I might go to my boss and say, can we make it a norm, or like a non-negotiable, that at work we are, during meetings, we share agendas 24 hours ahead of time. And at the end, we have written action items that are shared out. And you could further say that, you could share a little bit more about why, or you could just ask for it, right? You
Yeah.
don't really owe an example or owe an explanation or example, but
Right.
like to give, the audience here why that would be helpful is, number one, it's a little bit of like, common sense ways of working in an
Mhm.
office environment, collaborating with other humans, but also that can really reduce working memory load. And, it can reduce sort of like the stress and strain and potential anxiety that neurodivergent individuals experience, like when they're leading up to a meeting, or, if there is a meeting from your boss without a subject line, right? That might
Mhm.
mean, oh shit, I'm totally in trouble, or
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever it might be, right? So,
Mhm.
going back to, the sort of like heart of the question, how do I get accommodations? What are accommodations? Again, I usually say start informally and ask for what it is that you need, right? And
Mhm.
that usually requires some deep self reflection, some honest self reflection, to just think about what your challenges are, and then ask for it, right? Like, ask for the support you might need. Like, another example is, a personal example of mine is, uh, after the pandemic, uh, we are forced to work from home.
Yep.
I found, oh, this is amazing. I love working from home. It's quiet. I don't have to wear my noise canceling headphones all the way. I can get up and take breaks whenever I need, etc. We were asked to come back into the office, and that's when I felt like my ADHD went like tenfold, because
Mm.
I realized, oh, I'm in like a my desk is in a pretty distractible, busy area of the office. It was in a main thoroughfare. Everybody's excited to come back to the office after not being able to see humans for a while. I get audibly distracted. I get visually distracted. If people are talking, I listen to their conversations. If I see somebody struggling, I want to help them before I do my own thing. And I realized I could not work in that environment anymore. And without sharing a diagnosis, I chose at that point not to share my diagnosis for no other reason than I just didn't want to.
Mhm.
I just asked for my desk to be moved to a
Mhm.
new location.
Mhm.
It didn't have to go through HR. I just went to my boss. My boss said, "Sure. How does this work?" I said, "That's great."
Mhm.
Every scenario is going to be different.
Mhm.
Every person is going to be different in what they might need and, what your support might need. But I usually suggest to go a little bit more informally first. Um, if you do need to go the formal ADA route, which is an official ask and request, and ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. You don't have to like disclose a diagnosis to your whole team, right? You usually just have to share enough with HR to show that there is a disability related need, and then you can collaborate on something like really simple, right? It doesn't have to be a big, expensive, you know, um, earth-shattering change. It can be very simple, it can be in plain language, and it can be through the lens of collaboration.
Mhm.
Some people just think sharing a diagnosis gives more context, but
Mhm.
again, it's all about your preference. I was in work scenarios where I did disclose and I didn't disclose, and it was all for different reasons, and there's no right or wrong way, really.
It's whatever you feel comfortable at that moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I like your approach about, if you decide not to disclose,
yeah,
just ask for things that you need to make you more productive.
yeah,
And how you could work better. Just like, I need a different notebook. I need a different laptop. Oh, I need a different workspace. All
yeah,
right. And
yeah,
so, asking for things that will make you more productive and maybe even framing it that way for me. Like you
yeah.
were saying earlier, what would make me more productive is if my workstation was changed.
Yes. Yeah.
Just asking for that, or if I could have, just letting you know I have my headset on to help me be more productive, that kind of thing. And
Yep.
then if that doesn't work out, then of course you could go the more, gonna call it quote unquote traditional route.
Yeah,
And
formal.
maybe at that point you may do have to do some disclosure, work with your human resource officer. It could still be confidential,
Yep.
but you can get your accommodations that way.
Yeah.
Um,
And I just wanted to share one more thing
yeah,
there
please.
because it's important to, I don't know, just give more ideas, I feel like,
Mm,
because,
mm,
people here, thinking about sharing your neurodivergence in the work setting to some people is very
yeah,
terrifying. And to
yeah,
other people, it's not, right? Like,
yeah,
I now shout from the rooftops that I have ADHD. I'm not afraid of it because if that doesn't work for you, then I don't want to work for you either.
right.
But that's me, right?
Yeah, but for some, yeah.
Yeah, but for some, they're not comfortable with it yet, and that's okay. But just another example is like, and you also don't really owe an explanation.
Correct.
Right, and that's not saying that that means then you're being combative or
Mhm,
secretive, right?
mhm,
You can just simply ask for something, like,
mm,
for example, I do my best work, like, in the early afternoonish,
mhm,
so, that means like, right before lunch. So, I had a, regularly scheduled weekly meeting with my boss at one point, right
mhm,
before lunch. And I realized once I sort of dug into my brain, I realized that, oh, wait a minute. I actually need that block to hyper focus before I go to lunch and take a break. And so I asked my boss, hey, do you mind if we find a different time for that
mhm,
meeting?
mhm,
He's like, yeah, sure, no problem.
mhm. Yep,
If
sometimes
she
it's
says
as simple as
why,
that. Yep,
yeah, if
yep,
she were to ask why, you could say, "Oh, I like to have a focus block
mhm,
before lunch, and I was feeling like it was hard for me to be super prepared for our meetings. I wanna make sure I can be really prepared for you and I to meet." Right?
mhm,
So, just it can be simple, they can be, easy requests, you can get creative with the type of requests that you want. Like, hey, even just letting people know, like I had to let my boss know, actually it wasn't a boss, it was a colleague. I had a colleague that loved usually when I'm in a work setting, I wear these, like, big
Mhm,
noise canceling headphones because it just helps me focus. She would often come up to me and be like, "Hey," and she would love to chat, and we were friendly, and, so of course I wanted that. At the same time, I had to share with her, "Hey, when I have those on, that usually means I'm in, like, focus mode, and when I get interrupted, I realize it might not sort of make sense to you, but it is really hard for me to get back on track."
mhm,
So, she happened to be the cubicle next to me. So I said to her, "Hey, if you wanna chat or if you have a question about something, can you, like, pop your head up and just say, 'Hey,' and that way I see you, I acknowledge you, I finish up what I'm doing, and then I come back to you in, like, 5 minutes, and I say,
mhm,
'Hey, I'm' that way I can finish up what I'm doing, leave a little breadcrumb for myself so I know where to pick up where I left off, and then go have my conversation." So it's
mhm.
sort of about, I guess my summary there is, don't be afraid to advocate for what you need. And there's no right or wrong way for what that looks like.
Mhm. Absolutely. And for the person who's in the cubicle next to you, let's say we're working next to you, don't assume you're being difficult or
Yes.
unfriendly.
Yes.
It just may mean that you need more focus time.
Mhm.
And so these sort of assumptions we make because we're not getting what we think we should be getting in
Yes.
response does not mean that that person is in that does not mean the person is not being friendly or is being difficult. Or one of my favorite words I hear is, "Oh, they're being so belligerent," and I'm like, "Are you sure they're being belligerent? They may just really need to focus right now."
Yeah,
Um,
I'm so glad you shared that. It's really an important, and you're right. This is really all about not assuming that people communicate in the same way as you,
Correct, correct,
right?
correct,
And
correct. I mean, it's so interesting because if someone had a physical disability, we
yes.
wouldn't say, "Why don't" we would never say to a person in a wheelchair, "Why don't you try harder to walk," right? We'd be appalled to ever say that, and yet we assume that if it's something that's not physical, that somehow we could just,
Yeah, it's
control it in
invisible.
some way.
You
Yeah,
can't see. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
This reminds me of a time I used to run a call center, and this individual came to me. And at the time, I did not know what ADHD was. But I remember she came to me. She goes, "I have ADHD. It's hard for me to just sit there and wait for calls. Can
Mm.
I knit?"
Yes.
And I just sort of instinctually, as a leader, and I was a new leader, I said, "Of course."
Yeah.
It worked out well until
Mm.
I got calls from people. "Why is the person in your staff knitting?" The person next to
Mhm.
her would be like, "Why does she get to knit? Well, then can I read a book?" And then it became this sort of whole thing. Um, and
Mhm.
at first I was like, "Oh my goodness, I created, a situation where now everyone's wondering about everything." But then I realized I'm only thinking from a very narrow point of view. And
Yeah.
then I was like, "You know what? If you want to read a book, but you'll still pick up that phone call the minute it rings, read a book."
Yes.
And to the person walking by going, "Sue, why is your department knitting, reading books?" Because it keeps them at their desk to take
Yeah.
calls.
Yeah.
What other thing is to say to you? And I think this sort of we have this mm, hopefully it's lessening, and I do see some parts lessening, but this
Yep.
perception that things have to be a certain way at work?
Yes.
When it really comes down to it, what harm is it doing to be knitting and reading if you're really only responsible, not only, but responsible for taking phone calls,
Right.
right?
Yeah, like, if
Um,
if you are doing your job, if
correct.
there is you know, first of all, I love that you did that, and that person didn't even have to come to you and say, "I have ADHD." They might not have even had a diagnosis. Somebody without a diagnosis or, something might just like to knit while waiting for a phone call, right? It might be something that helps them focus. They don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis, right? But it's so important to think about, like, ultimately it's about, are you getting the job done?
Correct.
If that person is hitting all their goals, the expectations
Yes.
are clear and they're living
Yes.
within them and they're doing their
Yes.
job within them, then
Yes.
what's the harm? right?
Absolutely, and that person and being in a being a call center representative is not easy work.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
Because you're literally on the phone for 8 hours, you have to take
Mhm.
scheduled breaks because you can't really step away from your desk in case the phone
Mhm.
rings and all of that. Um, and, it it kept her it made her happier at
Yeah.
work, because she didn't have to try so hard.
Yep.
It made her happier at work, and people reading made them happier to read, and, it wasn't impacting their ability to pick up the phone and take calls, and all of that. Um, the other part with, you know, I think this fear of if I do it for one person, I have to do it for everyone. Um, I, um I think that kind of, thinking is outdated,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like, in a classroom, if one kid needs an accommodation, that kid needs accommodation. That may not work for someone else. And this feeling of, this is where I kind of go, all right, I'm just gonna go off a tangent for a split second. I think people feel like equality is the same as equity, right? Everyone has to get the same thing or it's not fair. Based on
Yep.
what you and I are saying, for some people, they may need just quiet to take phone calls. Some may need to read a book. Some may need to knit. Some may need to doodle. And whatever it is that you need to do your job, that's, expecting similar outcomes is equality. They don't
Yeah.
have to do it the same way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we could have a whole conversation around equity versus equality or
Yeah.
equity, and
Yeah.
equality, but, I'm so glad you brought this up, and it's so important to, like, call out the fact that it can be different,
Right.
and, can I just share you're witnessing ADHD in real time. I literally lost my train of thought as to what I was gonna share on top of your point.
That's okay. That is okay. We
That's
could
how the
come back.
ADHD well, that's how my ADHD brain works, I promise. Oh, speaking of, look, I have a fidget here that I'm playing with as we're
I
talking.
love it. I love it. And that's the other thing is, especially at the school system, I'm like, who says the best way to learn is just quiet and sitting still?
Yes.
What an outdated thought,
So
right?
outdated. Yeah, and I luckily got my thought back, but, I do a lot of corporate workshops where I,
Mm,
go into companies that are interested in neuro inclusion and neurodiversity and or harnessing neurodiversity of all their employees. And, one of the biggest things that I guess like topics that becomes a point of discussion in the meeting room is like, because I talk a lot about showing up as your whole self and
mm,
feeling comfortable asking for what you need, etc. And showing up as your whole self, you still need to show up with a level of respect. You're still going into an office. You still need to treat people respectfully and, as peers and colleagues, etc. But I also share that this is all a two-way street, right? So if I ask for an accommodation where I can fidget, if I'm a little kid and I'm fidgeting
yeah.
at my desk, which by the way, I fidget with stuff all the time. Usually, actually, when I'm presenting, I usually have a fidget in my hand. Sometimes it's actually, I have a lot of like crystals. Usually it's
Mhm.
a stone because
Mm,
it grounds me. It
mm,
keeps me grounded and,
mhm,
and slows me down a little bit.
mhm,
But
mhm,
anyway, in those conversations, I usually talk a lot about it being a two-way street. Just because you need a fidget at your desk doesn't give you permission to bring the clickiest, loudest, most obnoxious fidget toy you could possibly find. You're still in an environment where other people are learning, right? So that doesn't mean bring your clicky pen in your desk, at your meeting and click it like crazy. You still have to be respectful of the people around you and aware, like one of the things that really helps me to focus, you can't see me because it's down here, is to shake my knee. I
mhm,
bounce my knee up and down. But
mhm,
what I realized was that when I'm in a meeting at a shared table, that bounces the table. Nobody
mhm,
wants that.
mhm,
So I have to make sure to doodle instead
mhm,
of bounce my leg, right?
mhm,
So again, this is not giving carte blanche to those that request accommodations to just show up and do whatever they need, it's a two-way street, and you're still collaborating and communicating with other humans that also have needs and sensory preferences and values and all those things, right? So, again, it's just about not assuming that everybody is communicating and doing things the way that you do.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think people, when we say one thing, people take that to the extreme, right?
Yeah.
When we're saying, hey, give the person what they need to be productive and successful, we don't mean at the cost of major disruption to
Yeah.
everyone else. Of course,
Yeah.
that's not what we mean, right? But
Mhm.
people kind of go there. But I'm glad you mentioned that because it's really about how can you work together to figure out what things that you could do that helps you focus
Yep.
and also is least disruptive to people around you, right?
Yeah. Yep.
100%. All right. So we talked about, asking for things, and to be more productive, to be able to be, more successful at workplace. So let's talk about how can you actually utilize your neurodiversity to be more successful at work.
Yeah. So, success is a funny word
Yeah. Yep.
because it's not a bad word. Just, sort of knee jerk reacting to it because, I think I've been pretty successful in my career, but I'm still working at it, right? I'm
Right.
still learning every day and approaching things through a lens of curiosity. To do that, I think where I found more ease, which of course then leads to success, I would say, and wins, right? It was that when I stopped fighting my brain, right? I
Mm,
stopped fighting my brain and I started designing for it.
mm,
And that was a really interesting, like personal moment when, before I had a realization that my ADHD was really challenging me was, I said to my husband one day in a moment of like, just, I have no fight left in me. I
mm.
said to him, honey, I just can't fight with my brain anymore. And I was, of course, like bawling. I was tears and all this stuff. And then it hit me the next day. I was like, so why am I fighting with my
Yeah, yeah,
why am I, right?
yeah.
So I feel like I learned what fuels me. I had to give up, I had to be very aware of my ego and
Mm,
let certain parts of that go.
mhm,
I had to again, going back to the fuel, right? The
mhm,
things that fuel me are novelty, storytelling. You have to start being aware of where the waves, are smooth versus too wobbly and unstable, right? Sometimes my working memory and my sense of time are like my really big challenge. So I have to find ways to work around those, right? So I designed literally my current job for me, right? And as a way to support others. And I recognize that comes with a level of privilege to be able to do that, at least in the way that I've done it, right? I left my corporate job to become an entrepreneur. I have a husband that was supportive of that move. Not everybody will have that option, but you do have the option to learn about your brain and ask for what you need, right? So
mhm,
I design my job in a way that, uses things that work for me. I write my priorities. I have the focus block before noon. I use a dopa menu to start tiny things and to remember the things that motivate me and incentivize me. I ask for support early if I need it, right? Like I work with clients. I have to ask for clear deadlines. I have to ask for written recaps. And I treat, you're never gonna have perfect days. In fact, as a woman, you definitely don't have perfect days. Our hormones wreak havoc on ADHD.
yeah,
That could be a whole different topic if we ever want to go there.
yeah,
But I treat those off days as I went from treating those off days as like doom and gloom and like,
mm,
oh, here goes the negative self-talk spiral. Here goes the I'm a terrible employee. I'm never going to get this job or this title or whatever. Instead of treating those off days as a verdict and like a hard, point, it's more data that
mhm,
helps me learn about what
mhm,
it is that I need. I have more
mm,
self-compassion. I have more language. I have more
Mm,
vocabulary,
mhm,
to share with my husband, so that we can work with each other, to share with colleagues, to share with collaborators like
mhm,
yourself, right? And that's how I really make my wiring a strategy.
mm,
And it's really the thing that has, by doing that, it really helped me develop my, coaching approach and my sort of,
mm,
like, framework that I
mm,
use,
mhm.
with the wavy brain, and that's the name of my practice. I realize I didn't say it in the very beginning, but my practice is called the wavy brain for a very purposeful reason. If you go to my website, you can tell that I have a background in brand management. But I've used this sort of like framework because it helps me sort of like succinctly put some, like steps behind it.
Right.
I usually share people number one, get to know your wiring. So like map out your strengths, your challenges, your friction points, right? Then design your environment, reduce, like for example, reducing notifications,
Mhm,
you know, putting up imagery or things around your environment that make you happy or give you some of that dopamine that works, right? Um, use tools. So I mentioned that I mentioned a dopa menu before.
mhm, mm,
Dopa menu and different. I didn't come up with that term. It's a somebody smarter and much more funny on the internet did somewhere along the way. But it essentially is a term for a list,
mm,
tools and strategies that support your wiring in
mm,
in any given situation.
mm,
Because if you're overwhelmed, when you're
mm,
overwhelmed, it's gonna
mhm,
be hard to recall,
mhm.
"What do I need to help my overwhelm?" It's
Right.
literally just a menu of options so
Mm,
that you can go and say, "Oh,
mhm,
that's it. I'm overwhelmed. Let me try this," right?
mm,
Other tools could be like a timer, for
mhm,
example, a visual timer.
mhm,
And then the fourth one, I usually say is advocate early.
mhm,
So it's for the conditions that make your output better.
mhm,
And then lastly is that self-compassion and iteration. Bad days happen, but success or smoothness will support your learning and your iteration on what works and what doesn't. And that's the funny thing about the interest wired brain is you will come up with a strategy, but your brain will eventually get bored of it.
mhm,
So that's why you need things like
mhm,
self-compassion to know, why didn't this music work today? It worked yesterday. And also the dopamine menu to say, okay, I tried music today. That didn't work. What else could I try? So
mm.
yeah, so hopefully that wasn't too long of an answer.
No, all very, very helpful because you're giving options, which is very helpful.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I want to maybe even do a stronger lean into utilizing aspects of one's neurodiversity
yeah.
to be distinctive, to achieve career success, however
Mm,
you define it, or to be better at something, perhaps even. And just to use a very small example, I was complaining to someone, a colleague of mine. I said, I am so impatient. What's wrong with me? I'm so impatient. And that person turned to me and said, "But impatience is also what's allowing you to get stuff done." And
yeah,
so in that vein, sometimes, we may, like you said, being neurodivergent, everyone is different, but maybe some people lack focus or some people, whatever it may be. But how do we lean into that actually could make us better at certain things?
yeah. I love that you brought this up, and, I don't know if the audience is gonna hear it on the recording. Did you hear my computer just say, "It's 2 o'clock"?
No, actually, the
My com
cancellation's so good.
Oh, yeah,
But
so
your computer says that.
yes, the
Gotcha.
audience might not hear it, but my computer, I set
Mhm,
up the because I know that I get lost in time, especially if
mm.
I'm in hyper focus, I set my computer to alert me audibly every hour on the hour what time it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
Another tool, right?
another tool, yeah. Yeah, but going back to your point, Sue, I love that you brought this up, and what your friend or colleague did there was a beautiful reframe for you. They reframed this idea of impatience as a positive, and, you know, when it comes to, like, designing your career or finding career success, actually, I'm trying to think of how to talk about this, because it could be either designing your career for career success or finding career success while, like, designing your current situation. So,
Mhm.
if you are neurodivergent and you are feeling like your career, let me back up. I feel like I was getting a little bit too specific and granular in the answer I was trying to give. Ultimately, what it comes down to is understanding your strengths and your challenges, and finding a way in which you can leverage those to get the best out of you, right? And sometimes that does require a reframe, right? So, like your example, for example, is a good one, because it's a good one, again, to also illustrate the idea of a two-way street, right?
Mm, mm.
While you're impatient, you that probably keeps you on deadlines,
Mhm,
right? So that is a good thing. That probably makes you a phenomenal, project manager,
mhm,
but you also have to know that other people might
mhm,
not be that way. So you have
mhm,
to sort of find ways to ease in,
mhm,
right? And find ways to leverage your strength as a strength while still considering others and what those implications might be. Like, an example for me, that always got me into trouble pre understanding my diagnosis, is that I was told that I was a little bit too transparent in my the way that I spoke. So my
mm,
verbal impulsivity would often get the best of me.
mm,
And I would just be like, "I'm just gonna say what everybody's thinking. This meeting could have been an email," right? And that got me into
mhm,
trouble. So, I had to learn to not dim that, but use it in a more productive way.
mm,
And, by speaking more clearly and articulately and being a part of the solution, right?
mhm,
In that scenario. So, getting us out of that meeting and, writing up those bullets for, action steps and next steps for everybody, right? Um, but yeah, I think, to summarize, using your neurodivergence for career success is really about understanding what your neurodivergence is,
mhm,
and either giving yourself permission to lean into that and build your career from it. So either give yourself permission to, if you realize that, like, going into sports psychology is actually not your jam, because you realized it's not
mhm,
for your neurodivergence,
mhm.
maybe explore a different way, a different part of your career. And I realize it's a lot easier said than done to just say, "Oh, switch your career," right? There's a lot of decisions that go along with that. But, I guess my point is, so it's either that, or have a moment of self-discovery and real true awareness in your current role, and ask
Mm,
for what you need for
mm.
better success and output, right? And again, that's whether or not you choose to share a diagnosis.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I'm hearing is, a few highlights of what I heard from you is, um really get to know yourself more about what are the aspects of your neurodiversity.
Mhm.
Um, and then, like you said earlier, instead of fighting against it, utilize,
Yeah.
uh, respect what your brain is trying to do to,
Yeah.
respect your brain and go with the flow as much as you possibly can,
Yeah.
instead of fighting it all day. And then when you're ready, take another step forward and say, okay, wow, my brain is able to do this really well.
Yep.
Maybe I could find a career or a hobby or a passion of mine that
Yeah.
allows me to utilize that to its fullest. So, for
Yes.
example, my impatience may make me a great business owner, but may not make me a great surgeon, right?
Yes, that's
Whatever
ex
it may be. I just made that up, but and just sort of leaning into that and being able to sort of utilize. I don't know. I hear the word superpower a lot lately, but I actually mean that. Like you have
Yeah.
for example, your ability to be unfiltered in the way you speak could be an amazing asset for certain things,
Yep.
right? And maybe you can't do that all the time, but that's an asset. What kind of roles or what kind of advocacy or what kind of hobby or what
Yes.
kind of passion allows you to lean into that? Because then you'll be able to do that better than no one else, right?
Yeah.
Um, I was speaking to someone else, Marie, on one of my other videos, and she said, this is when you may want to use AI. Type in, what are some good jobs for people who are outspoken? See what comes
Yes.
up. See
Love
what
that.
comes up. You may never have considered it. And then what I also like is your practical approach, because not everyone may have the privilege or the opportunity to sort of lean into that.
Yeah.
Um, and may have to stay at the job that we're in or don't have much time for hobbies or anything like that. But take a look at your current role and say, I'm really good at this, or this is where, I need some extra support. Ask for that support so that you could be more productive, but also ask for those opportunities where you could
Yes.
shine a little bit more too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
You
Like if
want to, yeah,
yeah, if
add to
you
that,
see a
please.
project, right? If you see a project that you wanna work on,
Yeah.
as an ADHDer, I like, as an example, I like my day-to-day job, right? But I might see a project that I'm like, "Ooh, you know what?
Hmm.
That is going to be enough shiny object, enough sparkle and novelty to run that project and keep me super interested in this job."
Hmm.
So I'm gonna go to my boss and say, "Hey, I know there's this project happening. Can I work, like, on a
Hmm.
stretch assignment? Can I work
Hmm.
on that project with
Hmm.
them?" Right?
Hmm.
And I love, love, love that you brought up, the idea. I'm forgetting, how you phrased it exactly, but you said something to the effect of, like, "Or do it outside of work."
Yeah. Yeah.
And with ADHD specifically, this isn't a sweeping statement around neurodivergence in general, but ADHD specifically, we are often very values driven individuals. And we're very, you know, we're values driven and we oftentimes feel very, like, what's the word? I used to say that in my corporate job, and this is a sweeping statement, I didn't always feel this way, but at a
Yeah.
certain point, I felt like a caged animal.
Hmm.
And that was because I learned later that it's because ADHDers often feel, um, we feel too constrained when there's too many rules or restrictions, when we can't allow our brains to get creative and come up with the cool idea. We feel like it puts us in a box, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And however, at that point, so like where this example comes from is I know I'm a highly creative person.
Yes.
That's not a surprise. I was in a creative world, so in brand management, but I was pretty senior in my role, so I wasn't creative on the day to day. And so there, and I also have two, at the time, had two really young kids. So I also wasn't feeling creative. I wasn't prioritizing my creativity outside of the office. So I felt extra constrained because
Mm.
I wasn't doing the thing that made me happy
Hmm.
side of work. So
Mm.
that's where this like self-awareness really has to come in. You have to really think about, is this a skill that I want to lean into in my job? Or is this a skill that I want to prioritize outside of work?
Mm.
Similar to like as you mentioned, your colleague in the call center wanting to
Hmm.
knit. It
Hmm.
made her happier
Hmm.
because she's an ADHDer that needed creativity and kinesthetic
Yep.
processing to
Yep.
do something with their hands to make them happy, which
Yep.
then probably made her do her job better.
100%.
So, yeah,
100%.
if we could have so many like sub conversations.
We absolutely can. We absolutely can. Whew, um, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Anything else that you would like to add to this topic about um, uh, being a neurodivergent and still having the career that you want to have? Any advice, tips, or concepts that you want to share with us that we haven't covered?
Oy, so many things. The biggest thing I would say is there is no right or wrong way. There is only the way that works for you.
Mm,
And, like that comes from working with hundreds of clients. And so often people will come to me and they'll be like, "So, how do I do it?" And I'm like, that's not how this works.
mm,
You know, there's no right or wrong way. You have to find what works for you and figure out how to make that happen. So often, and I think it comes from, you know, like this outdated feeling or thought that you brought up earlier that like schools and offices are built for efficiency, right?
mhm,
So there's this idea that like, oh, there's a way that we're supposed to do something.
mhm,
Actually isn't.
mhm.
So find what works for you and lean into it respectfully, of course.
Of course, of course.
No super clicky pens, but
Yeah, right. No super clicky pins, but maybe a quiet fidget toy or maybe a different workspace or whatever else that may be helpful. I would even take workplaces and schools were built for efficiency. I would even add to that it was built for efficiency for a certain type of
yes.
person.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Anything else you want to add?
Well, if you're interested in learning about coaching or how coaching works, coaching is a really effective tool to support neurodivergent individuals, uh, no matter where you are in the neurodivergent spectrum of things, right? It really can help you verbally process.
Mhm, mhm.
Our brains actually hear things differently when it's out loud versus in
Yeah.
our heads.
Mhm,
So if you're interested in just wanting to know more about it, do some AI searching, do some Googling, or honestly, reach out to me.
mhm,
I'd be happy to talk about it or point you in the direction of a coach that would be a good fit with you, or we could have a discovery call. But it is a really effective tool. And, you can think of coaching as a thought partner, right? A collaborator. And that's what's really cool about it. Someone said to me, I forget who it was. They said, your career should be a team sport.
mm,
And I loved that so
mm,
much,
mm,
and that's how I think about coaching and even conversations like this,
mhm.
right? You know?
100%. You
Yeah,
don't have to figure this out alone
you don't.
if you don't want to.
Mhm.
And if it's not working for you, it may be time to look at tools, look at coaches, etc.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's been a great, great conversation. I have very much enjoyed it. I hope everyone who's watching also found some useful information. Thank you for tuning in today. If you want more videos about things related to jobs and careers, like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.
Thank you.